everybody. Welcome to our distance talk for the Greater Boston Applied Behavior Analysis in Urban Education 2020 conference. We are ABA Inside Track, and we are here to talk to you about navigating supervision in the public schools. Huzzah! Where you can't go to right now anyway. But you know what? Later you will be, and you'll be so glad you learned this information. So thank you so much for checking in with us. Who are we, though, you might ask? Who is this ABA Inside Track? Or are these ABA Inside Tracks? We are a behavior analytic podcast hosted by the three of us. My name is Robert Perry Cruz. I am a BCBA who works in a public school.
Hello, Rob. It's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
And who are you?
I'm your wife.
But you're not just
so nice to meet you. Well, I'm a co-host of the show, which is you usually tell me some nice facts like how I'm fabulous I am, but I'm a professor at Regis College, and I teach in an MS and ABA program.
And who do we have live via Zoom?
I am the third co-host. My name is Jackie, not Perry Cruz, but Jackie McDonald.
But still fabulous.
But still fabulous. And I also teach at Regis College in the MS and ABA program.
You know, when I get back and start updating trainings about stimulus control, I'm just going to make podcast introduction related examples just because everyone gets those, right? You know, when you're Zooming, you don't podcast the same way you do your normal recordings. So those are our day jobs, our evening jobs or afternoon jobs or whatever we get time to record is for the ABA Inside Track podcast, which is a behavior analytic podcast. Every week we take a topic and discuss relevant research articles. So our talk today is not going to be too dissimilar to an episode of the show, though we will try to keep it within the allotted conference time as opposed to the meanderings that a podcast can go on, and they can go forever. So we'll do our very best to get you in and out and get you all the information you need. So today's topic, like I said at the top, is going to be how do we as BCBAs provide supervision to other folks, whether they be RBTs, BCBAs, candidates, BCABA candidates. How do we do that in a public school setting, which may or may not see that supervision as an important component of a lot of the other work that needs to go on? The business of school is teaching and supporting children. It is to help improve the work of adults, which usually dovetails nicely with the idea of supervision. The more staff you have who have advanced training and advanced supervision, the more likely you're going to have highly qualified staff working in positions with students, which is going to benefit everyone. However, a lot of times when we talk about supervision, what we're going to be talking about is the idea that supervision is a really time-intensive process that doesn't always lend itself to, say, the hours that a school is providing services to students, which is going to cause a number of challenges and barriers that need to be addressed and overcome in order to provide quality supervision. While it would be easy to say it's much too hard, we can't do it, it can be done. And we are going to talk about a few ways that you might find success yourself. So what are we going to learn tonight? Well, we're going to make sure that all of our participants can define pyramidal training and identify a skill that can be trained in this way in their work. We're going to also be talking about promoting bidirectional feedback during our supervision. That is going to be both ethical and socially valid. And then we're also going to talk about two ways that a minimum of 2 ways, but 2 ways at least you should get, that you can provide supervisor support to your supervisees in that public school setting. Those are the goals. We'll come back at the end and you'll tell us if we did or not. So most of the time when we do this show, we have a couple articles that we're discussing and they sort of make the greatest component of our talk. Tonight's going to be a little bit different in that we're not going to go into quite as much detail, both due to time and so that we can focus on the summary points. But the 3 articles that we mostly got the information that we wanted to share tonight are listed here. So we have Gibson, Gray, and Hastings from 2009, supervisor support as a predictor of burnout and therapeutic self-efficacy in therapists working in ABA schools from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disabilities. We have Parsons, Rollison, and Reed, 2013's Behavior Analysis and Practice article, teaching practitioners to conduct behavioral skills training, a pyramidal approach for training multiple human service staff, or pyramidal if you want to say that, but that's wrong. Say pyramidal. We had a discussion about that.
I still can't say it the other way. Pyramidal. I know that's not right.
Pyramidal.
Pyramidal.
I'll continue giving you feedback and having you repeat it. You look great. You're such a fabulous person. You're saying it wrong. Say it better. Thanks for coming. That's my feedback sandwich.
Oh no. That was like bread meat.
And then Turner, Fisher, and Lucelli, 2016, from Behavior Analysis and Practice, towards a competency-based, ethical, and socially valid approach to the supervision of applied behavior analytic trainees. So those are the articles we'll mainly be discussing tonight. So why don't we start talking about the article on self-efficacy and supervisor support and answer the question, is supervisor support important?
Probably not.
We'll assume it's yes, and then we'll go on from there. So Jackie, why don't you start the conversation here?
This article really is one of the first articles that looks at the correlation, so not causation, let's put that out there, correlation between supervisor support or perceived supervisor support on such things as like work demands, self-efficacy, therapeutic efficacy, staff burnout, well-being. And these authors argue that it's important to look at what may affect work performance of ABA therapists or ABA paraprofessionals, because this may correlate to differing levels of procedural integrity, right? So if you feel really accomplished in your job, you feel like the demands that are placed upon you are appropriate, you may see higher levels of procedural integrity than if you are feeling very stressed at your job, you don't care anymore, you feel like there's being too many demands placed on you, then we may see, a decrease of procedural integrity, which then particularly may affect student success. So that's what they were trying to think about as they conceptualized this article. So they really wanted to look at the specific instances of work well-being and see how the perceived supervisor support would correlate with how people felt about their well-being at work. So before they developed a questionnaire, so they didn't really do a study here, they just did a questionnaire, but before they did a questionnaire, they looked at previous research that compared work-related stress demands. And what the hypothesis on all the previous research suggests is something that we'd all agree on, that high demands with little support by your supervisor is probably the most stressful place that a worker can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all agree there, right? That sounds like a horrible place to be. And they also looked at whether if a supervisor was very committed to the philosophy of ABA and applied that to the treatment, if that would have any bearing on ABA therapist well-being and perceived work performance in the classroom. They thought that it was possible that if there was some perceived supervisor support and a high commitment to the philosophy of ABA in the classroom, that might predict better self-efficacy as well as lower staff burnout because there may be more buy-in to the treatments that we are seeing. But again, these were all done outside of the field of ABA and looking specifically at course loads for teachers. Another thing that they found when they looked at the literature on education and teachers is that excessive workload correlates highly with mental exhaustion. We've all been there, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so all of these things kind of point to similar aspects of a job as an ABA therapist. These researchers specifically wanted to look at the perceived effect that supervisor support could have in all of this. So if we increase supervisor support, will we see an increase in other things that may then be correlated with increased procedural integrity? So 81 therapists participated in this study. They ranged in age from 21 years old to 44 years old. They were across multiple schools in Dublin. Love that. And the typical work week was around 32 hours. So that seems fairly comparable to what we would be doing here in the States. And they provided a survey to all of the schools across Dublin, and they got around, I think, like a 45% return rate. So everybody got it. It was like, you get a survey, and you get a survey, and you get a survey.
Look under your chair. It's a survey.
It's a survey. And so the survey looked to measure 5 things. They looked at the Maslach burnout inventory, which measured burnout across 22 items, and it measured the severity of burnout, which could potentially at the worst be emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and then reduced personal accomplishment. And they looked at a 7-point Likert scale there from I never feel this way to I feel this way every day, which you don't really want. The second measure was perceived therapeutic efficacy. So how in a tough situation when you're working with a child who's aggressive or when your reinforcers stop working, how efficacious, I can never say that word, but I think I said it right.
You got it, girl.
Thank you. I'm so smart. Efficacious, the treatment that you are providing is. They also looked at a work demand subscale of school organizational health questionnaire that focused on how the perceived work demands of the ABA therapist. So are you overloaded with work? Do you have no time to relax? at school, although I'd love to relax at my job. But those are the things that they're looking at.
Get those little moments every now and again where I'm going to take a second, just sit back in my chair, you know, and get back to it.
Maybe not, right? Maybe you don't have those.
That's true.
If you're in the movies, you do. You put your feet up on your desk, right? You like twirl your pen, but only in the movies.
The fourth method they looked at is perceived supervisor support. So they provided 4 strongly positively worded support, like I feel very supported to my supervisor listens to me, and 4 negative worded statements. My supervisor doesn't show up to meetings. That's short that, right?
My supervisor spends all their time sitting with their feet up on the desk and not actually helping me.
And then the 5th measure was autism treatment philosophy questionnaire, where they looked at how committed your supervisor was to the ABA philosophy in treatment sessions. And so, so they turned all these surveys in, and let me tell you about the results that they found. Ta-da! Results. So
there were some
results. So the good thing in this small population, they did report low levels of achievement burnout, which is like a precursor to all out severe burnout, where you like just kind of have no personal achievement. You have no stake in your job right now. You're just checked out. So this seems like it's a very low level of achievement burnout, which is good, but you did see a lot of high level of emotional burnout, which is a precursor to all of the levels of severity of burnout. So that's something that we should watch for. And this, again, is only a small subset of ABA therapists. They did find, which I find fascinating, working longer at your job, so for more years, you see more therapeutic self-efficacy. So the longer that you work at the job, the more you think that you're making a difference. What I kind of love, right? Because why would you stay in your job if you didn't feel that?
We got a high enough turnover rate without feeling like every year I think I do a little bit less for the people in my care. Oh, geez. Glad that's not the case here.
But it also could be a self-selecting population, right? So the folks that choose to stay in this line of work find it more rewarding.
Could also be the folks who answered the survey really wanted to say positive things about how their work was going, and the people who are too burnt out to bother filling in the survey.
Very true. I think that's a limitation of this study, right? Because if you checked out, you're not going to do a survey on your job. But I think the key point here is that the supervisor support, or the perceived supervisor support. So remember, it's a questionnaire, so they didn't actually look at how much support the supervisor was providing, just how much they felt the supervisor was providing. And those that felt they had a lot of support felt higher accomplishment in both low demand situations and high demand situations than those with moderate to little supervisory support. And you actually saw a decrease in personal achievement going from a low demand situation to a high demand situation when you're looking at supervisor support. So overall, high levels of perceived supervisor support are associated with better outcomes overall. Everyone feels better. They see that their treatments are working better. There's more commitment to the ABA philosophy. They feel invested in their job. They feel well. They feel like very well, I guess. They don't have high levels of burnout. And so I think that's something to think about as we move into the next 2 articles that we're going to discuss, that supervisor support is very important to keep staff and to keep staff engaged in their jobs without quitting.
I think as we move through these articles, as we try to tie it into thinking about supervision in the public schools, then I feel like our take-home points from all of these are going to be, how can we be most efficacious with our time, right, as supervisors, so that all of the staff that we oversee feel supported in the ways that they need to be supported. And it doesn't always take a lot of time and resources in order to support someone. It may just be reaching out and making sure that you make contact with them daily / weekly / whatever it is that is appropriate for them, right? Just to check in so they have a little bit of contact with you. And that little bit of contact can really go a long way to have someone feeling supported.
Right. And as a public school supervisor, you may have multiple staff that you're working with, and you don't have to reach out to them individually. That's not what we're saying. You don't have to be like, hi, how are you? How's your day? To your 30 or 40 or 50 staff that you supervise, think about concentrated groups that you can reach out to, right? And make contact with those groups. That may be a better use of your time than singly spending all day and making a block email for every single person.
Yeah. Or I used to have a supervisor that every Friday she'd just send out the same like funny dance video, right? And, we knew that she was thinking of us just because she sent it, and it only took a few seconds, but it was fun and we felt supported in that way.
Let's move on to another topic that comes up for folks who are trying to do their best with the time and maximize their time for supervision. But before we do that, as part of attending the conference, I think originally people were going to come to your house and have you sign in and sign out of your talks as you watch them. I don't think that was feasible. So instead, we're going to do some code words for you. So when you are signing into the conference, I'm not sure of the exact details of all that. That'll probably be on the conference website, but you do need to have code words from the talk. That's going to be your sort of the sign in and sign out, or your QR code, equivalent from our distance learning. So I'm going to give you the first code word now, and then you should write it down and put it somewhere special and save it for later. And it is SOAP, SOAP. Hopefully you're able to buy some soap, SOAP, soap.
Rob loves to stand on this kind of box. Soap.
Pineapple box, of course. No, it's soap. All right. So now let's continue on talking about supervision. Now, one of the main tasks of any supervisor in terms of both providing support in sort of just those regular check-ins, observations, is going to be some amount of supervisory training. That may be training in the form of, I'm just checking in to watch you and it's an ongoing process. It could be training of, I don't know if you know how to do this skill, so I'm going to make sure that you do so that you can be the best employee in the school that you possibly could be. And one of the nice things about training, the big positive, is there is a huge amount of evidence supporting BST, behavior skills training, as a very, very effective means of training folks to mastery and then leading to a high percentage of the people you train maintaining those skills over a period of time. Now, part of supervision is going to be continuing to check in, continuing to provide that performance feedback. But for the most part, once you use BST, you really can kind of take a minute. I think a lot of work in public school is sort of, I have to get this done and then I need to pause. I have to get this done and then I need to pause. And the more you're thinking about what are the systems I'm putting in place so that I can do a task effectively, pause longer so I can go put out all the fires I need to put out in any given day, and then come back and work on my next, big project, you're really going to find yourself feeling that you're getting more done in a day and watching how much more other people under your supervision are able to do in a day. So using BST, that's the number one way to train your staff. If you say, I just love to do lectures, no, stop immediately. Do BST. Just in case you do not know what BST is, I could give you a million articles and books you could read, and you probably should get to those at some point. But just for the purpose of today, the steps of BST are provide a rationale. It's not always a step, but for the purpose of the article, they added that, so I'm going to add it in here. Provide a rationale. Hey, this is why we're going to learn what we're about to learn in a training. Vocally describe the steps of the target skill, sort of like I'm vocally describing the steps of BST right now. Then you would provide a written summary of the target skill steps. Again, I wrote them out right there for you to see. You would demonstrate the target skill. This is where I'm not actually going to do all of these things for you. Demonstrate the target skill you are hoping to train or you are planning to train. Have the trainee practice performing the target skill. You'll observe and record the trainee's correct and incorrect performance of the target skill. Again, that's not always listed as one of the steps of BST. However, the next step will kind of require that you paid attention and know what they did right and what they did wrong. So it's sort of implied. We're going to make it explicit because, again, the authors of this study we'll be discussing did as well. Then you provide supportive and corrective feedback, sometimes labeled, lumped together as performance feedback. Basically, what that means is you're going to say positive things and nice things about all of the things they did right. Then you're also going to provide corrective feedback. Let them know what wasn't done right and how they would do it correctly in the future. That future is now because you're going to then have them engage in the skill. Again, you repeat steps 5 to 7 until you reach a predetermined mastery criterion. Could be 100% correct across 2 probes. Could be 80% of steps of my task analysis, whatever the skill is. Whatever the mastery criterion is.
Too exhausted
until you're too exhausted to continue. Yes. So that's BST. Now, one of the things I want everyone to keep in mind, if this isn't something you typically keep in mind, is the idea that just being a good behavior analyst does not make you a good trainer of behavior analytic techniques. Just like supervision is its own skill, training other people is also a skill that you need to learn. So it is probably a prerequisite that you are pretty darn good at what it is you're going to train because you do want it to come off as effortless when you're showing people and modeling how to engage in the skill. But just because you can do it really well and you work really well with your clients, with your students, doesn't mean you have any idea how to train other people in doing things. That was a fun lesson I got to learn way back when I first started being a BCBA, that I'm really good at my job, therefore I'm sure I can train everything. And then I was always surprised, why aren't my staff doing the thing I just told them all about really, really well? Aren't I good at that? And I learned, no, there's more to be learning. And that's what we did. So those are the steps of BST. Now, it would be great if I could say, and use BST and supervision dreams will come true. But sadly, one of the key issues with BST is it takes a very long time to do correctly. One of the things that my district is currently doing for a lot of our paraprofessional staff is providing distance learning opportunities. So we said, let's take this opportunity, do it up real nice with some BST, because it's hard to find the time during the school day. The people you want to train that you are supervising are usually working. And when they're not working, they're going home. So when are you supposed to find the time to train? Maybe you can get 1 or 2 people at a moment, someone's sick, so maybe I can get 2 or 3 people. But if you only train when you have a moment, you will never have enough trained staff. You will never train enough of your supervisees to then properly train other supervisees or train other direct care staff. You're never going to catch up. You're always going to be behind. And using BST is in some ways more difficult than doing just talk training. You could probably pull 10 people, record a PowerPoint, throw it up somewhere. Could you please watch this during your lunch break? The problem is you ain't training anybody if that's all you're doing. You need to engage in behavior skills training to pretty much guarantee that the skill is going to be learned or at least reach some level of mastery. So where are you going to find the time? And this is where pyramidal training or peer training is another term that's used, comes into play. And basically what that is we take a senior trainer. So usually you're thinking, probably you, the BCBA, or the person overseeing or supervising your program or your classroom. You take them, you train a group of other staff, probably say maybe senior technicians or your own BCBA supervisees, or maybe case managers, whatever your district calls that kind of next level position. Train them how to engage in some skill. Let's say discrete trial training. I'll train you how to engage in discrete trial training. Then I'll train you to mastery using behavior skills training. Then you'll go ahead and train all of your maybe direct care staff or paraprofessionals how to do discrete trial training. It doesn't actually cut down the total amount of training hours it needs to go into it, but it sure does spread it out. Because I'm sure as a supervisor, it's not your job to only train 50 people in 10 skills. You probably are also making clinical decisions. You're checking in on staff. You're consulting in classroom. You're wearing many hats. So it's not going to be easy to say, well, all I have to do is find the time for this training. You need to be able to spread it out. And that's where the pyramidal training benefit can come in. There's also been plenty of research on how effective pyramidal training can be in terms of teaching skills. But what actually hadn't been researched before the article that we'll be discussing today, the Parsons and Rollins and Reed, is using behavior skills training in our pyramidal training teaches skills kind of down the pyramid, but then does it generalize to other skills? Or do we have to engage in multiple examples of pyramidal training to teach every single skill? What if, rather than just training a certain target skill, we trained the use of BST in training? If that works, couldn't we just do one training on BST and then we never have to train again? I mean, that's a bit much, but to some extent, that's what the goal would be. I'm going to train you all how to train people really well. Then you will go ahead and train everybody else forever. And now I can move on to, the next fire. I can move on to the next project. And then it allows the people who are kind of doing the frontline work to also become the people who are monitoring what's going on a regular basis, which again is something that you want to do, but may not have as much time as you'd like to do. So here is the study that we're going to be talking about.
So you teach a man to fish situation here.
So again, can BST itself be trained through the use of the pyramidal training model? The authors here went to an adult education program and they decided, let's train staff using BST in the use of BST. And what they did was they had a number of adult students. They had some teachers, they had some teacher assistants, even some kind of senior level technicians who were responsible for training, who actually had never been trained how to do training, they found out, and decided we're going to train them to use behavior skills training to teach some target. The target wasn't really as important. The format overall was we're going to teach them to do like MSWO and embedded teaching were some of the skills they were trying to teach. That wasn't the key component. We had our target skill, which was, again, how much of the steps of behavior skills training did these individuals, these participants, use when we asked them to pretend to train me, the experimenter? I'm going to pretend to be a staff member. Pretend to train me. How many of the steps of BST do they use both before in the baseline and then after training? The nice thing I also really liked about this is you got your baseline, you had your training, and then you have your post-training sessions, which, sort of looked similar. You also had a follow-up where they actually then looked at, after we've trained our participants to use BST in their training, will they then train other people to a level of mastery? So they then went and observed, did these participants actually then become more effective trainers? And then did the person they train learn a new skill? And when we get to that part a little bit, you'll be impressed at how many different skills were learned.
It's like a Hall of Mirrors thing, this study.
It really is. I think I refer to it as my notes as like an Ouroboros of training.
Yeah.
We're going to train using BST to teach the use of BST and teaching using a skill using BST. It just goes around and around and around.
But they did it.
They did it. It was great.
Yeah.
So in baseline, they did a simulated training where the experimenter pretended to be a student. The other experimenter pretended to be another student. One was pretending to be a participant, one was pretending to be a student that would be worked with. It gets very complicated. They needed new pronouns, I think, for this article to make 100% of sense without a little extra reading. And they just said, all right, I want you to teach me how to engage in a skill. It was least to most prompting and provide me 2 items of choices. So how would you teach someone how to do that? And then they'd say, well, how many steps of BST were used without any additional training? Then they provided the training to their participants. They had 2 instructors teaching about 3 to 4 people in 3 to 4 groups. The trainings were about 2 hours total across like 2 sessions. This, again, because of the time limitations all the staff had in terms of receiving additional training. And what they would do is they went through the steps of BST to describe the steps of BST. So they tell them, BST is very important. Here's what BST would look like. Here's me doing BST. Here's a written copy of what BST is. Now watch me train this skill. Embedded teaching and MSWO were the 2 targets skills that they were talking, like the secondary targets. Watch me do it. First I do this and then I do this. So it was like an explanation of an explanation of an explanation, when you think about it. They really were focused on the modeling of the use of BST in training. It didn't really matter. It could have been any skill, MSWO, embedded teaching, DTT, didn't really matter. What mattered was the steps involved. And then they followed through. As the participants were practicing and demonstrating the skill, they gave them a corrective feedback. They told them what they were doing correct, what they needed to do differently next time. And they would repeat and repeat and repeat until all of the staff were proficient in the use of behavior skills training to teach the embedded learning and the MSWO skill. So that was the training. Then they went into post-training, which was pretty much just the same as baseline. I want you to show me how you would teach this role-playing experimenter how they would do a new skill. And I actually forget the skill. I didn't put it in my notes, so no. But it was pretty much just teaching a different skill. So it was something totally different than the MSWO or the embedded teaching. I did want to make a note of how they did their feedback, because I think a question comes up a lot in supervision is, how do I give feedback? Do I do the feedback sandwich? One nice thing, one corrective thing, one negative thing? Do I follow the 4-to-1 ratio of positive to corrective feedback? They use kind of the modified feedback sandwich here, which Parsons and Reed, I think, describe in their supervision book. A positive empathetic statement to start, specific statements of what the individual did right, what they did incorrectly, if there was something that they did incorrectly, how they would correct that performance in the future. They said, do you have any questions? Do you have any clarification? So the individual had a chance to, ask questions to make sure they were doing it right next time. They let the participant know, I think this is important, I'm going to watch you do this again, or you did 100%, you did everything right, we're done today. And then they ended with an overall positive statement, which I assume was, and you look great today, which is always, we all like to hear that, right?
It's totally appropriate to do that with your supervisees as well.
Probably something along the lines of, you're working so hard at this. Thank you for putting in your 100%.
Yeah. And I'll just say the Reed feedback sandwich is it's both meatier and softer than just the regular old feedback sandwich. I don't want to eat this
soft sandwich you're describing to me. I want like a hearty sourdough.
It's soft. It's a little bit coated.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because it's not just like good, bad, good,
mm-hmm.
right? It's a lot. There's a lot more nuance. If you're delivering a really good, they stick with the feedback sandwich, but it should be delivered well, and it should have like appropriate meaty content.
It's like one of those like Panera artisan feedback sandwiches rather than like your McDonald's feedback sandwich that someone just slaps together.
Sloppy.
For you. Yeah.
No gloppy. No. Yeah, like a focaccia.
And then finally, and I think this is really one of the big strengths of the article is, all right, now we're going to come watch you teach a staff member how to do something. And the skills that they were teaching here were like all over the place. There were student-specific vocational skills, sign language, prompting, things that had never been touched in the rest of this experiment. And they did a little, pre-test with the staff member who was going to be trained. Hey, do you know how to do sign language? Do you know how to string jewelry yet? So that they could then look at, after the training, was the staff member able to engage in the skill at a higher percentage of accuracy? They also did a social validity measure as well. So the results are, not surprising. Was BST effective in teaching a skill? Yes. Was BST effective at teaching itself? Yes, it was. You saw a huge growth in the ability of staff to use BST, which again is not too surprising. So we went from, folks using like 30% of the steps up to, about an average of 90% across the training groups. Usually the errors were things like, I don't know how to do BST, so I didn't do the steps of BST until someone told me how to do them, which makes sense. The on-the-job training was fabulous because 7 out of 9 of the participants, when asked to do a real training, engaged in 100% of the steps of BST right after the fact. The others were 88%, so it wasn't like it was that low. And then we also saw all of the staff who received training using BST made at least a 50-point increase in their ability to engage in skills from the pre to post test. And that 50 points would have been a lot higher, but there was like one person who was pretty good at the skill when they started, so they can only go up so high. A lot of people were going from like 0 to 100 or like 19 to 100%. So again, this was pretty effective. So the nice thing here is that we've got training not just in the use of BST, but then generalizes and continues to generalize to working with different groups and different skills. So again, it's not like this study has been replicated so many times that there aren't probably room for more. Well, would it work in this population? Would it work in that population? This was an adult education center, not necessarily a school system. So would the training need to be different? And that's a question that we'll kind of come back to when we do our summary at the end. But overall, this is a really promising way to take what little time you have to provide supervision in the form of training and maximize how that time can be used. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But while we're on the subject of ongoing supervision, Diana, why don't we continue on with your article, the Sophie Turner article on just general supervision practices?
All right. I'm happy to do that for you, Rob. All right. So this article is a really, really good one. It's from 2016, so it's not super old, but there is always progression in the supervision standards. So I think if you're using this, you also want to make sure that you're referencing the current experience standards by the BACB and the soon-to-be highly relevant 5th edition task list as well. So this article focuses more specifically on providing supervision for BACB trainees, so folks who are completing their practicum or fieldwork accrual hours and how you might supervise them. It's not specific to a public school setting, but I do want to interpret what they're talking about with regards to public school. And Rob, you may need to help me in that in some ways because I don't work in a public school.
I have all the supervision in a public school answers. I got them all. I shouldn't write them down yet. Publish that article.
Yeah, you should. All right. So
there's a reason I haven't. I don't know what it is.
The point of this article is to provide guidance on establishing standards for providing supervision experience to BACB trainees. So like I said, this isn't that old an article, but our field has really made pretty significant progress in the last, 5 to 8 years with regards to how we're thinking about how we train up and coming new BCBAs. And that really reflects the exponential level of growth that we've seen in our field in the last 10 to 15 years. So we're trying to get ourselves up to speed. But as you'll see in this article, there's still a lot of work that still could be done with regard to standardization of the training process and also resources and research related to the training process in our field. When we think about how we would develop a training sort of package, right, for BACB trainees, there's a few components that Turner and colleagues really lay out. They say we should be using evidence-based practice with regard to training. We should use evidence-based practice with regard to supervision practices, although those are sort of still forthcoming in some ways. And then we also need to stay within our ethical and practical guideline for providing supervision. So the ethics code we should be pretty familiar with. But the flip side of that too is that we need to think about the practicality of supervision, right? And how can we best provide it when we are all short on resources and time. And it's going to be a balance between doing things in a way that, again, is going to be most efficacious and effective, and recognizing what the limits may be for our time and how we can best serve the supervisees that we do take on without it being too many supervisees.
Mm-hmm.
So the article, there's no graphs in this article, which is a little bit of a bummer. It was really more of a thought piece, but they did a nice job of laying out some of the really important steps that one would need to take in order to start to finish, take on a supervisee, and really see them through in a quality way of providing supervision. So they lay out several steps and they call it a practice model for behavior analytics supervision. So I'm just going to go through those steps with you guys relatively briefly to give you a taste of them. And then as we go, Rob, feel free to kind of jump in if there are things where you say this would be easy to modify for a public school, or this one might be super challenging from a public school perspective. So the first point would be to set the occasion. This is their language too. Set the occasion for collaborative and ethical supervision. Okay. So in order to do that, you have to first establish a rapport with the person that you're going to be supervising, right? Because you want this relationship to be mutually reinforcing, and you ideally would like to be spending time with one another. You're going to be spending time with one another, right? And you want to establish yourselves in such a way that later on down the road, this person could see you as a mentor and someone that they can reach out to in the future. So you want to establish that rapport now versus just seeing it as another thing to check off on your list, right? But taking some time with this
Greek
person.
supervisee, check. Did it.
You want to start things off with some agreed upon expectations and goals. You'll hear that those terms kind of peppered throughout the first 3 or 4 actually of these steps because they really think that that is important, and I agree with them as well. So that's the first thing. You guys set the occasion. Next step would be define the relationship. And this is funny to me, and it might just be me because when I was in college, the culture of our college called when you first start dating someone and then you guys are deciding if you're boyfriend, girlfriend, or boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, if you're going to be in a relationship, like an official relationship, right? Then it was called having the DTR, which was the define the relationship talk. And until you had the DTR, you didn't really know where you stood, right? Was it just a casual thing? Or were we dating, or was it like serious? So I just thought that was funny, but I think that that was probably specific to Furman University. Okay. So here the DTR means something different. It means that you...
I hope it does not mean...
It does not mean that at all. It means that you are, again, going to clearly define the expectations and goals regarding your relationship with respect to your supervisee. And they also bring up something nice here that I wanted to highlight, which is everyone who's entering into this relationship should keep in mind that both of those parties have a past history with either being a supervisor or being a supervisee. And they may also bringing in differences in their beliefs, their values, their culture as well. And those things should be considered and, if appropriate, discussed too, in order to get to know your supervisee well and also recognize, where they're coming from and what some of their reinforcers might be.
I really think that all of these points that you're bringing up apply both to BACB supervisees and to your employee that you need to supervise and do the job, right? Because you do want to set the occasion for collaboration. You want to DTR, right? You want to have that back and forth. So I think that's one way that this article is so critical when you're thinking about supervision in a public school, because if you have these set up prior to going into a classroom and trying to tell everybody what to do, I'm pretty sure you're going to promote more buy-in, and more collaboration if the outline of the supervision and the relationship is already defined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And there's going to be a punchline to these first 3 or 4 bullet points here in a second. So the next one, as you might guess, is finally actually talking about the performance expectations that you've been setting up in the last 2 bullet points. So here you want to lay out clearly what those are going to be, what the behavior that's expected from each party is. And their examples are things like, if I need to cancel a meeting, I'll always give you 24 hours notice, or I will always respond to emails within 48 hours, or something kind of along those lines. And then they also say, as the supervisor, recognize that taking someone on as a supervisee is a big responsibility. And you want to ensure that you're giving yourself the time built in, right, to give that person the time that they need. And there's always going to be prep time, follow-up time, as well as the time that you're spending with that person too. So finding ways to ensure that you're going to build in those opportunities without taking on too many supervisees is important. And then last one that kind of fits into this category is evaluation of performance expectations. So you want to have these established beforehand, thinking about how you're going to evaluate your supervisee and how they're doing. If you're in a school system, you may have some of these systems built in already, right? There may be performance evaluations, there may be standard observations that are conducted at regular intervals and opportunities for both written and verbal feedback. If so, that's great. If not, you may want to look at establishing some of those systems. And there should also be, at the beginning of a new relationship, discussion of what if things aren't going great, right? What if I do need to give you feedback on a poor aspect of your evaluation? What if a remedial plan is needed? Let's go ahead and lay out all of those terms now, so that if it does happen down the road, you're not caught blindsided, and we have the opportunity to build upon an already constructive relationship versus having this be something that's shocking to you. And all of these things that are listed here on this slide, if you're in a BACB trainee supervision situation, and these should all be part of the contract that you sign with the person, right? So there's going to be a place where those are written down. It might not be a bad idea to have something written down as well, even if it's not a BACB trainee that you're supervising specifically.
I just kind of would double back to both what you're saying, Dan, and what Jackie, you were saying, is regardless of your role in your school system or at your school, whether you are supervising and you spend a lot of time supervising the CBA candidates, whether you are mostly just supervising program staff or special education teachers who have, some experience with behavior analysis, this framework is going to be really helpful in terms of how are you, again, maximizing what time you have. If you have a program where, think about the average school system. There are lots of observations. I think schools have come a really long way in terms of using data, setting up more times for observation, providing more structured feedback. I've been in schools for going on 10 years now, and I've certainly seen that shift over time. But one of the issues you're going to run into is the person doing that supervision is not necessarily someone who is well-versed in the principles of behavior analysis. So while they might say, I love how you seem to have a rapport with the students you were working with. I love how you took instruction from a teacher. I love how you were on time to work today. There are a lot of those general positive things that we also agree are an important part of professionalism. They're not going to be able to speak to the nitty-gritty. You could get glowing reviews from, say, a principal or a program, overall program director, and then as the BCBA, you were watching the same observation, like, that person was terrible. They didn't do anything right. They did everything wrong. It was all punishment procedures, and they were following a terrible behavior plan, and they didn't look for embedded teaching once. But that's not going to be the feedback that the individual gets. And this is why I think it's important for those of you who are in those sort of multiple roles, supervision, where you're a BCBA, but you're also an educator, you're also doing some supervision of these types of employees and those types of employees. Really taking the time to say, what is the model I'm looking at? What are the expectations? And then making that well known. And then putting that into your relationship building and your observations. The more staff see you, the more they know what those expectations are, the more you're giving them positive feedback about how they're reaching those expectations, the better you're going to be able to continue building that rapport. And the happier people will be to see you, and the more willing they're going to be to hear you when you say, hey, remember, when you're doing X, Y, or Z, don't forget ABC, whatever it happens to be. The details will change if it's a BCBA supervisee versus, say, just general supervision, but the overall framework is the same, and those steps are very important. If you want to save yourself time and not be running after people to, figure out why everything's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next 3 points here, I think really the slide says it all, right? These are things that we would want to be considering in any supervisory relationship. Making sure that we're attending to confidentiality, considering the prospects of remote supervision, which may be possible, and then termination of the relationship. And that can be terminated in a good way as well, not just a bad way.
It's not you, it's me.
Right. And then the other thing that they bring out, and I think these are really important points as we move forward and thinking about how to best supervise trainees, is how are we going to assess skills and how are we going to teach those skills? They recommend doing some types of informal assessment, talking with the folks, going through the task list, as well as observing them, and then using behavior skills training, as we've already discussed, to teach and promote those skills. And then the last point really is thinking about those advanced skills, which sometimes may be thought of as more soft skills, interpersonal skills, problem solving, decision making, and creating some appropriate types of case conceptualizations and modeling tools to use in order to have maybe some more standardized opportunities for individuals to practice these skills. I think that this is an area in which our field needs to continue to grow, particularly given that supervisors are often limited in time. If they didn't need to recreate the wheel with all of these materials each time, or have such a varied experience for supervisees based on the experience of supervisors, then that would overall be a benefit to our field. And that's kind of where they leave this, is saying this is all good, but it's really just a model that we've developed thus far. But moving forward, we would like to see more research in this area. And I agree, that is exactly where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. So let's move into our summary area of the talk, our dissemination station. Right, a sound effect check? Okay. Oh, okay. There we go. We usually do a sound effect. We should get like a Foley board maybe someday, but it's usually just Jackie, our very own sound effect machine.
I thought I was on mute, but I wasn't. I was frantically trying to unmute myself.
So again, in terms of our dissemination, we sort of had 3 general points that we were focusing on. One was, how are we supervising our staff in terms of providing training in a manner that is going to be time effective, but also evidence-based and overall effective in terms of increasing target skill development? What are the components of structured supervision that are going to lead us to our best outcomes? And then also, how are we making sure that we find enough time to provide support to our supervisees? We'll just go in the order that are in the slides here. So in terms of the use of pyramidal training, I really do think this is a good way to explore the idea of providing the most training to the most people, and then allowing that to be a component of ongoing supervision. So you're going to build off what everybody knows. I know I'm a big fan of onboarding processes. So when someone starts in a program that I'm either consulting to or helping to run, I know I don't have the time. I barely have the time to do the initial training. I'd rather just jump into, hey, I'm going to use BST. So if you already know how to do this, great. This training is going to go super fast. If you don't, great. You're going to learn how to do it to mastery, rather than figure out who knows what. And then I guess I have to develop some training for some people, but not others. That's not going to happen. Everyone's going to get the same training eventually. So I typically, jump ahead. But a lot of it is, as much as I love to do the training, the realization that there is no way to train everybody who needs training in behavior analytic techniques. You're going to have to count on other people. And just assuming that people who you see do a good job can therefore be good trainers is not going to cut it. So again, what are the replications that are needed to see how effective pyramidal training can be in a variety of settings with a variety of staff? And then the other question that we do have to also ask is, some of us did get into the idea of supervision because we like to check in with people. We don't want to be trainers, or we really don't believe we have the time in our schedules. So how much of our perceived time constraints plays into why we would not use behavior skills training? And just because pyramidal training might be an option doesn't actually mean it's going to resolve all the issues around, like, why don't we use better training methodology? It's easy to say we should use this, and if you don't, you're bad if you don't. But realistically, even with pyramidal training, we do have to be, cognizant of what is the time that we have for these skills. Is this a component of our ongoing supervision in our program? If it's not, I would say it should be, and I hope you would agree. That gets also to the idea of, what are those components that are going to lead to the best supervision?
Yeah, I think we have a lot more research to do in this area, to be quite honest with you. It's wide open for anyone who would like to jump in there and do some research with their BACB trainees. Let me know. I'd be happy to help.
Yeah. We have at least a framework to start. And I mean, some of those things probably sound like, oh, I have that. That's part of my school program. That's part of how I do my consultation. But again, it never hurts to go back and review those pieces and then think, am I doing this in the kind of formalized and structured manner that I would need to do to make it an ongoing part of my consultation, my supervision day in a school? Because if you're like me, much of your job is, hey, there's a problem over here. Quick, run over and solve it immediately. And as we know, there are very few problems you can solve immediately. And if you're just running around putting out fires, you're never actually going back to say, well, why are there so many darn fires in this school? Metaphorical, fires, of course. We hope. And then also, how do we find the time to support our supervisees? So I think, Jackie, you had some kind of general thoughts from reading the article on self-efficacy.
Yeah, so just quickly, I think that you really need to focus, if you have a large number of people that you're supervising, place them into groups so that you can do a group supervision, right? So that you can get everywhere, and be mindful in those plannings. Put those as something that's important in your calendar so that you make time to do those types of supervision. High levels of supervisor support, even if perceived, was associated with better outcomes overall. So here, it seems like we'd want to do that, right? To make sure that our staff are feeling supported, that their well-being is good. That may lead to less training for us, right? Because they might stay around longer. And then 2 things I think to take home for perceived support is to remember to use reinforcement principles in your supervisory interactions and to try to demonstrate empathy, right? Because that's something that we all need to do in our supervisory actions. And a little bit of that can go a very long way.
That is very true. Very true, Jackie. So I guess that gets us to the end of our time. And I know we'd all love to talk more about sort of general ideas and anecdotes. And I know if we could all be there in person, we'd love to. So we'll stay after and answer questions. But by the time you find us, we'll have moved on to something different, unfortunately. But I know certainly you can always reach out, certainly to the organizers of the conference. You can also feel free to email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com if you have any questions after this presentation. And hey, if you enjoyed the way we talked about research, well, we do have a podcast that comes out every week that goes over topics like this as well. So that's another way if you want to, get something to listen to in your car. So it's like you're in a conference everywhere you go, which honestly, I guess you really are in a conference everywhere you go in this climate. Before we go, you need that second secret code word. I didn't forget. It is GLOVES, GLOVES, gloves. What you put on your hands in the winter or to prevent germ spreading, gloves.
Should have put a ring on it.
We want to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting us to speak. It's always such a pleasure to, see especially local organizations in the Boston area where we are all located, coming out and supporting behavior analysis. And we were so honored to be asked to speak. We hope you enjoyed our talk and the conference. And again, please feel free to email us with any questions. And, I guess we will see you when we see you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.